Hello, everyone. Good to see familiar faces, new faces. My name is Cesar CJ Baldelomar, and I am visiting lecturer in religion at Mount Holyoke College and adjunct professor at Boston College, where I'm currently crafting my dissertation. It is an honor and pleasure to facilitate this session alongside 4 distinguished scholars in the field. Before we begin, shameless plug here for our journal, I want to mention that I am the new book review editor for our journal, Religious Education. My gratitude to my predecessor, Dave Sinos, for his laudable work over the past few years. And thank you, Dave, for helping me seamlessly transition into the role. Thank you to Joyce Mercer, editor of our journal, for your trust in me as I embark on this service to you, members of REA, and to our journal readers. At this point, I want to extend a personal invitation to each and every one of you to consider submitting a book review of a relevant text in our field. You can find more information on book reviews on the REA website, but please feel free to reach out to me for more information, including which books are available for your review if you don't have one in mind. My email, I will put it in the chat. Thank you for your consideration. Now to our session. Thank you for joining us for what promises to be an illuminating and fun session as we hear from our esteemed and wise colleagues in the field. Wise lives and stories, learning about publishing from senior scholars in our field, graciously organized by the Publications Committee, will offer us the invaluable opportunity of learning from respected scholars in our field about the sometimes mythical world of publishing. They will share their wise insights with us in hopes of encouraging us all to craft knowledge and models of praxis that will benefit the academy, churches, and society. Without further ado, I will now introduce each panelist and invite them to share a few words about their backgrounds. Let's begin with Professor Groome.
You're muted.
Sorry, friends. Well, it's lovely to see so many old friends. That's old in the endearing sense, not chronological. We've been around a while, at least I have. And so in many ways, I'm kind of in the sunset, the sun time of my career, but it's been a very blessed journey. And indeed, my path has crossed with many of yours along the way, and have been life-giving, I hope, for both of us. So I'm delighted to share what little wisdom I have about publishing, but we'll leave that until the body of the conversation.
Thank you, Professor Groome. And now, Professor Hess.
Hi, I'm Mary Hess. I serve on the faculty of Luther Seminary, which is an ELCA seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Although I'm a Roman Catholic with a degree from Boston College, and live in both of those worlds.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Lee.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Boyung Lee. I join you from Denver, Colorado, although my body says I'm still in Japan since I came back from Japan last night. I teach at the ILEF School of Theology in Denver, which is a 131-year-old United Methodist Seminary, although 1/3 of our students are not even Christians. I served as a dean until a few days ago, and I am on sabbatical with a very happy spirit.
Thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, Professor Seymour.
Hi, Jack Seymour, retired from Garrett Evangelical in Evanston, Illinois. Served as editor for Religious Education and one of the co-editors of Horizons.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear panelists, for your presence today. Before we jump into the conversation, I want to provide our audience with a snapshot of the format. Each of our panelists will have 3 to 5 minutes to answer 4 questions presented in 4 rounds relating to our session theme. For our first round, we will begin with Professor Seymour, followed by Professor Lee, then Professor Hess, and end with Professor Groome. Round 2 will start with Professor Lee, and so on and so on. I will read the question, which will also appear in the chat. We will reserve the last few minutes for Q&A. Please either enter your questions in the chat or raise your virtual hand during Q&A. And of course, feel free to comment in the chat on anything that catches your attention during our conversation. Thank you for joining us. Now, showtime. Round one, question one. Professor Seymour, how has the world of academic publishing in religious education changed over the years? What advice or navigational points do you have for those in the field, especially for junior scholars?
Friends, I'm not sure I really know how to answer the question, but I have a couple suggestions. I published my first article in 1976, so that's just been a couple years ago. The world has radically changed, and most of you probably could better answer this question or answer it as well as I can. When I entered the profession, my denomination had a robust curriculum production. It had a large publishing house. It had a significant group called Christian Educators Fellowship. And through that network, and here's the two words I just want to keep saying, network and connections. Through that network and connections, I was able to find some places to publish. My denomination does not have most of those things today, and that's true with most mainline Protestant denominations. Some of the rest of you will have to talk about your situation. My suggestion would be that we start reaching out beyond the traditional journals of our field. I'm reviewing now for some online journals, Religions, Educational Sciences, and one called Knowledge. That whole online world is incredibly robust. And you can even suggest to the editors of those series that you write, that you want to edit a journal yourself. I think, and quickly, I think there's organizations that Mary can tell you about that are on the website, like the American Educational Research Association. I think we need to start attending public education research associations as well as denominational ones. And I wish, for example, that REA was able to help craft a statement that could be used by seminaries, colleges, etc., in the review process, because the old review system of publication is broken. And when universities keep trying to review people on those old systems, what they're doing is guaranteeing failure for folks. Let me stop there quickly. You can move on. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights. Professor Lee?
Yes, I studied teaching full-time in early 2000. And even then, the publications in the field of religious education has been limited quite. As a woman of Asian heritage, my struggle has been at that time was that I wanted my first book to be something about religious education related to Asian American or Asian experiences. And whenever I submitted a book proposal, a publisher would say, this is very important, very strong proposal, but we don't have a market. Unlike a Latinx context or African American context, at least there is one common language. You Asian Americans do not have a common language, so we don't have a market, which assumes that the books about Asian Americans are only read by Asian Americans. So that was my huge struggle. But now, in over 20 years, I especially with Black Lives Matter, racism, and a lot of unfortunate injustice, unjust happenings in the world, a lot of publishers are interested in publishing something about this world affairs from teachers and scholars who understand the pedagogy. So now I see in that way a little, field or publication world has a little been different, although it's still very selective. and very essentialist approach in many ways. And also, so in my case, in addition to publishing in the field of so-called religious education in narrow sense, because my tenure clock was clicking, but I also wanted to publish something that I have also passion, and because as a person of this Asian heritage and in the field of religious education, I was I think I was trained both in religious education, in cultural studies and religion, or Asian American studies, Asian American feminist theologies. So I want to do both. There is no either or approach. So so my strategy has been, and I think it has been working. And so this is a tip that I would like to give our early career colleagues, that beyond religious education field, our field really has a lot to offer. So participate in neighbor fields in different subsections in AAR and other fields. So in those moments, I seized the moments to publish in books, journals that requires a pedagogical perspectives. So as a religious education scholar, I brought pedagogical perspectives to very different subjects, including racism and other critical topics of our world. So I encourage our early career colleagues, keep trying in a religious education field that you are trained, but also you have a lot of connections to other fields that they need to hear from you, because we tend to stay in our own cocoon field, but we have so much offer to other fields because we are really trained as interdisciplinary scholars.
Thank you so much. And already there's a common theme emerging here of reaching beyond the fields, right? So thank you for that wise advice, Professor Hess.
I guess I'm going to echo a lot of what's been said. Everything is changing. And I think it's going to change even more than we've observed this far, partly because of generative AI and the large language learning models. And I don't think any of us have a clue what's going to come from that. But I do think Hank Green is useful, and I'm going to keep putting things in the chat actually as we go, because part of what he talks about is adaptation and how we're going to have to adapt. I've been writing for quite a while now about dynamics as digital media shape what we're doing, and I've been talking about authenticity, authority, and agency. And I think you've already heard in the meeting the last couple of days, as we've talked about the agency of children. I think that that's true actually all along the age spectrum. I also think that we have to think about context. As you all know, it's super important. And part of what digital tech does is throw us into context collapse. So what do? Well, first of all, you need to think about what you actually mean by publishing. Why do you want to publish? How do you define academic or academic publishing? Some of us have been working for decades actually in the Association of Theological Schools to try to transform what we do for the portfolios for tenure and promotion reviews. Maybe we're slowly getting a little bit of room there, but I'm not sure where that's going to go because all of that ecology is dissipating. I think everybody needs to create a digital presence so that you have some agency yourself in how you're defining the context in which your work is being engaged. I think you need to practice wonder or curiosity. You have to keep learning, right? Which is part of the discussion about getting involved with other kinds of guilds. I think it helps to have a small group of people around you with whom you can consistently check your biases, think out loud, and test your ideas. I don't know how I could do this work and writing without it. And honestly, I don't know anyone in my generation. Now, this may be different actually for Jack and Tom, but I don't know anybody in my generation who makes money from their publishing in religious ed. So I think you ought to give up on thinking that's going to happen and think about Creative Commons licenses, right? Which are really important ways to get your ideas out there. I'll have more to say on some of the other questions, but as CJ said, submit to our journal. That's a really good place to start. Anyway, that's enough for now.
Thank you so much. A lot of rich material to unpack there. Thank you. All right, and Professor Groome. You're muted.
I'm still muted. Sorry, I was saying I think I have very little to add to what my colleagues have already said, and that last point that Mary is making, I think, is still a very valuable one. At least and I'll be very brief here because I may say a little more under the other headings. But in most contexts that I have either been directly involved in or indirectly involved in, invited in as an outside reviewer or something, while the writing has changed, but in many ways, the refereed journal is still gold dust. It's still, so to get an essay in a collection of essays edited by a friend or somebody is never as effective as the refereed journal. And we're blessed to have a very fine one in our field, but there are others as well, the International Academy of Practical Theology and other journals. But if you have an option, and again, you know this already, at least in my context, the kind of well-established publisher is preferable to the new venture. Now, the new venture may be a fine scholarly publication, but if your colleagues don't recognize it that way, then your writings and your publishing may not get as much credit. I'm thinking when you come up for tenure, when you come up for promotion to full professor, the better and this is sad to say, but in many ways, the university journals or the university publishing houses, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, etc., are usually they're poor. They don't distribute well. They don't sell well. But when it comes to tenure review, that type of prestigious publisher is a help. It's not inevitable. It's not sine qua non, but it certainly gives you a certain credibility if you're with a university publisher. Even though, as I said, they sell poorly, they advertise poorly, at least in my experience. Yeah, and maybe, and if while publishing has changed, in many ways, writing has not changed. And I'm reading a lovely book. I just want to mention this before I forget it. It's by Mark Nepo, N-E-P-O, Drinking from the River of Light. It's an extraordinary book. It's a number of heads nodding. It's just a beautiful book, but it says that whatever you write it from the heart. Write what you're passionate about, write what you deeply believe in. That's really ultimately what's most worth writing and most worth publishing too as well. Yeah, there's echoes of that, of course, in Parker Palmer's We Drink from Our Own Wells. But this Nepo book, I recommend it. It's just inspiring, especially for would-be writers. And he's adamant that we draw upon our own heart and our own passions, our own commitments, even while we hope the essay will get us tenure or something. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. And that book, actually, I have it here and I'm about to read it. So
Good.
Whether you mentioned it, yeah, I've been following his work. The Exquisite is also a good one.
Take your time with it. Take your time with it, CJ. It's something you read like a couple of pages a night and think about. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, wonderful. Now on to round two, question two. What pivotal opportunities came to you to write and publish works in the field of religious education, and how did you seize the moment? Okay, we'll start with Professor Lee.
Okay, I think my moment came not just I seized, but it came to me through mentoring, especially through Jack Seymour. When I started my career, I think my first article accepted for publication in religious education was 2005, and I started teaching in 2002. And I was hired as an ABD, so I had to finish my dissertation, and also my tenure clock was clicking, so I had to do both. And so I published things in other journals, but I tried religious education in my first 2 years, but didn't work out. I don't know why, but as an international person who became US permanent resident and teaching, still I struggle with that imposter syndrome about my English writing and English writing, thinking in someone else's language. So whenever that reject moment that came to me, I took it personally, and I'm still not good enough. So I was in that moment, and then I submitted I think I made a presentation and registration meeting like today. And then I submitted my paper to the journal. And of course, again, it was rejected. But Jack, who was the editor, not overseeing the publication part of the submitted papers, but as a journal editor, came and wrote me saying that Boyung, even though your paper was rejected, I disagree with my colleagues. I think this is bold and this is a very important topic that we need to hear from you. So Jack mentored, it was about gender and sexuality. I was touching on LGBTQIA issues, and I was also doing post-colonial theologies. So in many ways, during those days, in retrospect, because I was doing Asian American feminist issues, gender and sexuality, post-colonial theologies, in addition to my training as a religious education scholar from Boston College. In many ways, I was labeled as, oh, she does those post-colonials, those radical things. And now a lot of our colleagues do their work. But in early 2000, I was one of the few, unless the only one doing, tackling on these critical topics. So when field was not ready for me, and I tend, when they didn't see the importance of my work, I took their rejection as my first personal failure, but it was Jack who saw the needs and importance and reached out to me and mentored me. So when those moments happened, at first, when you are dealing with the imposter syndrome, you don't know whether you can take it or not, but you need to trust your mentors. So and I emphasized that you still need to, even in my stage, I still have a mentor. I have a few people that I still talk with about my career, my writing and all that. So having someone you trust, someone you respect, someone who can be really honest with you and then trust that their advice is important and then seize that moment. And so, as many of you know, that I was the president of REA 2020. And one of the things that I emphasized at the board meeting a lot was mentoring our younger colleagues and early career colleagues and doctoral students. So, not only just we give the time of the day, but how to publish, how to overcome imposter syndrome, how to unbias ourselves is really important in connection to our publications. And I fully agree what Tom said, we have to publish something that speaks from our heart. So I just couldn't publish out of needs of a publication for my tenure subject that I was not passionate about, but I wanted to, to me, it came at the right moment, the good mentoring and my passion all connected. And that person happened to be the editor of the journal. So Joyce, I know that your job is not just doing the editing work, but also a lot of mentoring. So I appreciate the work that you do too.
Thank you. And the value of mentors, mentoring is definitely so essential, and it will surface again during question 3, that question of the mentor. So thank you so much for highlighting our wonderful mentors, including mine, who's here in the room. So I don't want to embarrass him, but Dr. Ospino and Dr. Groome, of course, right? Both mentors. Okay, thank you, Professor Hess.
Before I say what I said about this question, I wanted to pick up on something that Tom said and note that one of the things about our field, in my experience, is that the seminary on whose faculty I serve doesn't really know our field at all. And so when it comes to tenure and review and promotion kinds of things, I agree with Tom that peer-reviewed journals are what I would consider the gold standard. My colleagues don't see it that way, unfortunately. And so part of what you have to do is think about your particular institution and what they care about, right? So if part of what they care about is books that are published by the publishing house of their denomination for a particular market, you need to know that. If part of what your colleagues care about in those processes, I mean, this is where you have to be alert to what your particular context is demanding. My most pivotal opportunities, especially early on, came from outside the field, which I think we maybe have already echoed earlier. And I don't know if that's because I'm an odd duck, feminist Catholic working on digital media or what it is, but the media, religion, and culture community was the one that first published my very first article in a journal. And that came about because I was at a meeting and I was presenting and talking about ideas I care about. So I want to echo something Tom said about working from your passion, working from your curiosity, really caring about what it is you're trying to get out there, and then finding ways to do that. Now, the thing about publishing is that it has changed dramatically. And probably the best advice I got from a mentor was not even somebody who was formally or officially a mentor, was a foundation executive who helped fund one of my very first research projects. And what he said to me was, trust that you write well when you're writing about what you care about. And that was important to me to hear. I think that most publishers these days want to know there's a market for your work. And so how do you demonstrate there's a market for your work? This goes back to, for me, having a digital presence, being able to say, hey, I've had hundreds of people download my slide shares, right? Or I've had, whatever, being able to see that there are people out there who are interested in what it is you're wanting to do. Now, there are, of course, some people who've managed to have digital publishing work for them in such a way that they even can make a living from it. And I think about Maria Popova, or I think about the work of Brian Stout. But that's probably not going to happen for most of us. And one of the things that's interesting about digital publishing and open access stuff is you can get ideas out there very quickly. So if you know about Heidi Campbell's work at Texas A&M, where she's writing about the impact of the pandemic on churches, those collections that she put out there got out there quickly because they were digital and they were open access and they were published in the context of the people who cared about them. I also think that writing for me is about reading and being in conversation. So like if you know the conversation you want to be in, that's the conversation you should figure out how to participate in. And you can do that online in various forums. You can do that in print processes, although print processes are really slow. Conferences help. Finding and in this day and age of online spaces, you can find all sorts of places where people are interested in things that you're interested in. Get into those conversations. I think that that's probably one of the most exciting possibilities out there, actually. And then, of course, there are things for those of us in the theological school world. The Association of Theological Schools publishes a very useful little guide to publishing in this arena that will list a whole bunch of publishers. There are probably similar things in other kinds of fields. But anyway, that's enough for now.
Thank you. Professor Groome. You're muted.
This will sound rather traditional. The pivotal moment, I think, for many of us was finishing a dissertation. When you say, I've done all this work, not everybody wants to publish their dissertation. So I know of some dissertations that are a disparate piece of work, a good historical study or something, and after that, they're no more interest in it. But most of us, in our field especially, I think, write out of our hearts and stuff that we're passionate about, committed to, and what have you. And I think that's the stuff when that pivotal moment of completing the dissertation arrives, or whatever it is you're writing on, and or thesis perhaps, then you want to get it out to a broader audience. Sure, you did it because you wanted your degree and all the rest, but you also want to get it out there and share it. And so, in a sense, but I often say to my own students at Boston College, but don't publish your dissertation. Wait, publish it 2 or 3 years from now, after you've taught it, after you've read more, after you've thought about it, after you've had lots of conversations around it. Come back to it, by all means, draw upon the research the good research you did there, but don't publish it immediately, because very often, at least in academia, a lot of the bias will be, well, your dissertation got you your doctorate. What have you done since? So rather than, in some sense, this is going to sound very negative, but rather than, in a sense, wasting that. Now you can start putting your research out there in chapters and in journals and what have you. But if you're thinking about a book from the dissertation, the counsel I always give people is wait a few years, teach it a few times, continue to read, continue to be in conversation, and you'll want to rewrite it anyway. And it will be a new work. It may be may build upon the research you had in the dissertation. I'm going to tell a melodramatic story of what prompted me. What was the pivotal moment in my own publishing? This is a true story. I was being interviewed at Boston College, 1976, and I was the third interviewee for the position. And I knew the other two people were good friends of mine. But I was the last interview of the day, and I ended up with the Dean of Graduate Arts and Science at BC, a man by the name of Tom O'Malley, a rather legendary Jesuit at Boston College. And we had a great interview, and it began by I saying to him, Father, are you the Cork O'Malleys or the Galway O'Malleys? And he said, oh, we're Galway. So we had a big conversation and asked me almost no question whatsoever about my work. But at the end of the interview, he said, I think they're going to hire you. I think they want to hire you. But he says, you'll never get tenure. And I looked at him and said, why? Well, he says, Boston College theology department will never tenure a religious educator. It's too practical a field. It's not considered theoretical. This is 45 years ago. So I said to him, well, what would it take to get tenure? Well, he said, you'd have to write a major work. It would have to be published by a prominent publisher, and it would have to be well reviewed in a scholarly journal before you come up for tenure. And he says, you don't have time to do that. You're just starting to teach undergrads and grads and putting your courses together, and you don't have time to do that. So I went home that night and I outlined a book called Christian Religious Education. And I started writing it the next day. What I'm saying, I suppose, is that we can publish sometimes because there's pressure on us to publish, and it doesn't seem fair, and we should be allowed to kind of do it at our own pace and not have to produce within the first 5 or 6 years, when you're just coming up for air, as it were. And all of that in many ways is eminently unfair, but it also keeps a certain pressure that we might not publish otherwise if there wasn't some expectation by way of publishing as scholars in our field.
Thank you so much. And I think something you mentioned there important is the necessity to just put it out there sometimes, right? Even if it's unfinished, perhaps, or incomplete, which all work is to a certain extent. So I think that's important advice as well. Thank you. And Professor Seymour.
3 words that my colleagues have already used: passion, institution, expectations, and then focus. I found early on 2 mentors who came to me. One in my denomination who said, Jack, I know this is what you're working on. It would help the church if you did Y. And then there was another colleague from the Religious Education Association after I did a paper. Friends do papers at REA. After I did a paper at REA, who came up to me and said, I really enjoyed the conversation today. Now let me help focus you. He was wonderful. His name was Steve Schmidt. Some of you remember Steve. And I was a historian and he was a historian. And it was very, very helpful. I found my first teaching position in a publisher parish institution. I knew there was this pressure for publishing immediately. Friends, I do everything I can today to fight against publisher parish institutions. I think we need to publish. I don't have any question that we need to do it as reputably as possible. I agree that peer-reviewed journals are the place to go. But the bottom line is there's too much interdisciplinary work going on that our colleagues do not understand what some of us in religious education are doing. Let me give a couple examples. If you get some blogs out there quickly and get some response to it, you can discover where your ideas are connecting, and then you can begin to focus your own work. The online open access journals are peer-reviewed. The ones that I mentioned earlier, educational science, religions, knowledge, they're all peer-reviewed. In 1998, I just got through, by the way, doing a project for the Wabash Center, writing their history. In 1998, there were 2 journals in the United States that focused on teaching. The Wabash Journal and one in math education. Now there are 174. Did you hear me? 174 journals focusing on teaching in fields. And 92% of those are peer-reviewed journals. We need to begin to think outside our field. Now, I can say a lot more about focus and passion and things early in the future on some of the future questions. But let me turn this around for a minute. I need to say something to our older and mid-level colleagues. You have got to mentor younger colleagues. You've got to mentor each other. Some of us spend so much time on our own stuff, getting it done, that we do not spend our time being available to younger junior scholars as they are writing. I think one of our vocational obligations is to make ourselves available to help focus, attend to, and support the passions of other people and do what we can to do it. That's an obligation of the leaders of religious education.
Beautifully put. Thank you. Round 3, question 3, actually an excellent segue to the question of mentors and advice. What wise advice did you receive from mentors about writing when you were starting your career? And we will begin with Professor Hess.
I don't think I got a lot of wise advice, actually. Sorry, Boston College. Mary Boyce gave me a book called Bird by Bird, which was wonderful and helped me get me through my dissertation. But honestly, it was stuff I gleaned around the edges of REA, which is partly why I got involved in REA. I totally agree with Jack that especially those of us who are old farts now need to learn how to be more present to and mentoring of our emerging scholars. And I say that not just out of some sort of patronizing need, but actually because that's how we keep learning. And some of the most interesting and exciting stuff that's happening is happening from people who are new into this conversation. So amen to that. I also, I was listening to Tom's story and I was thinking, in 1992, when I was applying to doctoral programs, my advisor at Harvard Divinity School, which is where I did my master's, was Frank Fiorenza. And he really wanted me to do my PhD at Harvard. And I'd studied with Mary Boyce and John McDarg at Boston College through the consortium, and I really wanted to go to BC. And BC offered me entrance to their PhD program. And so I said, I'm going to BC. And Frank was like, you are never going to get hired. And I was like, well, I don't care. I really care about these ideas, and I really want to work on this stuff. And, you know, so and this is the advice I give to PhD students now, if you think before you even enter a program, if you have questions you really passionately care about, and there's a program that will help you structure your learning so you can work on those questions, and if you don't anticipate a job afterwards, then yeah, get a PhD. But otherwise, it's really hard these days, right? The market is awful. And this is the thing about tenure. We were talking earlier, Tom was offering some advice about tenure. My institution may get rid of tenure. I watch institutions across the ecology, and we've hired, I think, 4 or 5 people in the last 2 years. Only one is on a tenure eligible position. So I think focusing on that element of it is probably, I would argue to you, less important than focusing on what you really are passionate about, which you've already heard multiple times from people. I will note, I think the best advice about publication in this field came last year in this session on publications from Elmita Wright. And so I'll put her link to that video in the chat when I'm done, because I really think that you can glean wonderful wisdom from people who are in this space. And one of the things about this association that I cherish is that people will talk with you. You can approach people like Tom Groome, right? Who is so famous that, I mean, I had somebody today say to me, oh, Tom Groome was in the room. I'm like, okay, talk to him, right? You can approach people. And I think that that's one of the things about this association that might be the best advice of all. Network, find your passion, and find people you trust to bounce your ideas off of, because we get stuck in little bubbles all the time, and finding ways to get beyond those bubbles is really important.
Definitely. And I want to emphasize that bouncing your ideas off someone as absolutely vital, and keep learning, right? I think that's something that is a theme that is coming up here, and something that I am also passionate about is just conversations across generations, across different identity markers as vital to any work in religious education. Thank you. Okay. Professor Groome, sorry.
And the third question again, CJ.
The third question is, what wise advice did you receive from mentors about writing when you were starting your career?
Yes. Yeah, again, my experience has been so limited and so focused, and especially within a university that's puts a great deal of emphasis on scholarship and what have you. But one of the people who was a strong mentor to me was a man by the name of Richard P. McBrien. He went on and finished up his career at Notre Dame, but he was at Boston College when I went there. In fact, he was key in hiring me. He was the one who thought I should get hired, or the one who was most strongly in favor of my being hired. And I remember him, that he was the one who'd shared the wisdom about, not publishing your dissertation, that get the benefit of the research from it, put it out in some essays, and then wait a while and come back to it. But this may sound a little melodramatic, but I think other than McBrien, there wasn't a lot of mentoring that I received at Boston College. I was somewhat of an anomaly in the department. Now I was teaching undergrad theology as well as graduate religious education, and my undergrad theology teaching was very well reviewed and quite popular. When people introduce me with listing the books I've written and all this, I often get up and I say, how many of you have ever seen Doug Flutie throw the Hail Mary pass? And of course, every hand in the place goes up. It's the most replayed moment in American sports history. And I said, well, my greatest claim to fame is that I taught Doug Flutie the Hail Mary. And there's actually a little bit of truth in it. I had him for both of his theology courses at Boston College. So my undergrad teaching was very important and life-giving. But at the graduate level, I was kind of plowing a new furrow for the university. Now, since then, we've been so blessed, and we've wonderful scholars and colleagues like Mary Boyce came on a few years later, and Jane Regan, of very happy memory, still a professor emeritus, and Hossman, of course, and Khaled Perry, their most recent hire. So we've had wonderful scholars pick up the mantle and move it forward in significant ways, and the ways in which I left it, where I hadn't pushed it forward. So that's been a real blessing. But But I suppose it also makes the point that if you're passionate enough about what you want to say, A, that you have something to say, and B, that you're definitely going to say it. I think if you have that passion, I think it'll carry you a long way. And yeah, and I suppose the grace of God as well.
Thank you so much, Tom. Professor Seymour.
I think I want to spend time talking about the essays that we used to receive for religious education and other essays that I've been peer reviewer for. You know, there's this old joke that when you ask a retired person to preach, they'll preach for 35 minutes and tell you everything they've ever known. One of the problems with most people's writing is they want to tell you in the book proposal or in the article everything that they know. And because of that, there is no focus and no clear argument, because they've got 6 arguments going on at the same moment with a lot of creative ideas, but no focus. And I remember writing several folks where I would say, you've got 3 essays here. I would love to receive any of them. Here's the one I would recommend that you start with. And I want to say, there's this phrase that some of you know, be simple, stupid. And I think in a lot of ways that's true. What we have to do is to take that passion that we have and say, what's one thing that I want to communicate, and what do I want to do with passion? And then when we write, stop spinning off 87 different tales, but keep focused on that one thing. Again, I don't need to say that. Too many times what we do is to spin away. The first book that I published was a book called Contemporary Approaches to Religious Education. It's the only one I ever made any money from. It sold over 30,000 copies and I made $1,200, okay? So there's no money that people are gonna make on this field, okay? I hope you know that. And that $1,200 was over 25 years. So, you know, that's not a very good return in the midst of that. But that book came because I was attending a meeting of Christian educators in the United Methodist Church. And I heard them talking about my colleagues, Tom Groome, John Westerhoff, and they were mentioning folks over at Maria Harris. They were mentioning folks, and they were saying, boy, I can use their material in my Sunday school. They were misunderstanding what our colleagues had to say. And I needed to say back to them, friends, you've got to use scholars' work with integrity if it's going to make any difference to your practice. And that's why that book came out. It was a simple idea of trying to help do a map for the field. I think we need to have simple ideas, focus them, and be clear about the argument we want to make.
Thank you. Professor Lee.
Thank you. I don't know what to add, to this already full advice. My first published piece was a chapter from my dissertation, which was originally a final paper I wrote in Kwak Pui Lan's class, which she, commented at the end of my paper that this is publishable. I really encourage you to explore this to be published. Of course, as a doctoral student, I didn't know what to do with it, so I kept it down, and it was in my computer folder for several years. Then a couple of years later, she asked me, Boyung, did you publish that? I said, no. And so then I was already in dissertation writing stage. She said, knowing she was also my own dissertation committee, knowing your dissertation, this will be a great chapter for your dissertation if you slightly revise it. So, so for me, the mentoring from Kwak Hui Lan, which is still going on, has been very important. The first mentoring word that she gave me was that because you are getting a PhD from Boston College, by the time when you finish your PhD, you will be the #1 person on your dissertation topic in the world for a very brief time. But because you are a woman, also you are a woman of Asian heritage, when you are hired, when you start writing, people will expect you to know everything about Asia or Asian women, because we live in very white-centered, essentialist world. So not to do any injustice to your people and your culture, you need to have a PhD level of knowledge about your gender and culture. That's the first advice she gave to me, and which I took it very seriously. Which in many ways expanded my work beyond the field of religious education and practical theology, and gave me a lot of opportunities to collaborate with the colleagues in other fields. So I encourage especially our early career colleagues and PhD students to think about your studies at this point in terms of what I received from Kwak Hui Lan, especially job market is so limited, and as a dean, former dean until a few days ago, I know that a lot of schools are hiring people who can do a lot more than your train the field of work. And so think about what you can do in terms of expanding, and one of the things you can do is beyond our field, that what is your affinity, identity that you are passionate about, that, and develop that as your scholarly field or teaching field. And so also Kwak Hui Lan showed me her computer screens in terms of her writing processes. So she was working on that famous book, Post-Colonial Theology and Feminism, and she showed me her first draft on her screen, which was not legible. I had no idea what she was working on. So she had 6 different versions. So the reason why she shared that with me was, not every scholar starts with great ideas, all polished place, but even someone like her starts with something illegible. So the discipline is that I guess advice is that you still keep working on it until you become clear. So I think it's just don't give up about what you are passionate about, and as she gets more knowledge and more information, that it became more legible. It became sentence and paragraphs and pages. So that I took it to my own practice. And third one is that because to someone like me, I studied as an ABD, so I had to finish my dissertation. I had to teach 4 classes from the scratch, and I had to publish. So I didn't have time to do everything. And then personally, I was also newly married and suddenly became stepmother to 2 children. So everything happened all at once. So the advice that I got from my dean at Pacific School of Religion at that time was think about so your research topic. How can you teach that as your class in the field of religious education or practical theology, and so that your teaching becomes a place of your writing practice. So the feedback you get from your students is informing your writing, and then your writing also forms and informs your teaching. So that was a really helpful and wise advice I got at that, especially those early days that when I had to juggle with so many different directions and needs. So what I would sum up is that keep good mentor, and keep that relationship. Kwak Hui Lan was my teacher, and when I was a student, and she was on my dissertation committee. But only a couple of weeks ago, I had to have about 2 hours of mentoring conversations about my life and all other issues. So we all need a mentor. We all need to be mentor, and also we need to seek out mentors.
Thank you. And I absolutely love the advice about just the writing process, seeing the writing process. So I think it's so essential to getting beyond kind of the mythical aura that surrounds publishing sometimes. And, it is a haphazard process. And I love when mentors show me their writing process, how they think through even what they write with, the instruments of writing, what they write on the paper or the computer, showing drafts. It's interesting that artists, record artists, recording artists, they have several YouTube videos of them behind the scenes in the studio showing their creative process. The same with novelists crafting their novels, right? How they do it, even their spaces, they show you their desks. Wouldn't it be cool if religious educators, if you scholars in the field would record YouTube videos, right? Showing your writing process, I think it would get some views, but that's my opinion. So thank you for sharing that. Now we reach our final round 4, question 4. And it seems so apropos that we have Professor Groome starting us off here, given that you spoke about sense of wonder and awe to start our conversation. So the question is, inculcating a sense of wonder is so vitally important to the craft of education, especially religious education. What were the questions that kept you up at night, or the questions that currently keep you up at night, and that drove you to engage in successful writing? In other words, what allured you and continues to allure you to research and to write?
Wonderful. I think, I've given some thought to this question already, and I'm still struggling with it. But in many ways, for me at least, and I don't say this should be true for anybody else in the whole wide world, but for me, the question really came down to pedagogy. When we think about this faith, or the faith that we cherish and that we hand on to rising generations and realize in our own lives and time and place as well, I think, sorry, I'm sorry, Riley, Riley, sorry about this. I was afraid this might happen. This is Riley, all 8 pounds of him. I put him out. Sorry about that. If I leave you after this comment, it's only to take out Riley. Riley is a dear little 8-pound Shih Tzu dog. That's a great companion to my life. But where were we before Riley? Yes. What is the ultimate question that constantly motivated and still motivates and prompts my research, writing, teaching? And that is that ultimately, and this sounds very inelegant, where the rubber hits the road is where we end up to teach. Now, our writings and everything else are terribly important, but how we go about teaching these faiths of ours and these rich traditions and spiritualities is really what makes the difference, one way or the other. If it's taught poorly, it'll have very poor results, or if it has positive results, it'll be only by the grace of God. But us being instruments of God's grace, I think mounting the best possible pedagogy that we possibly can is the mandate. And especially as educators, we're religious, but ultimately we are educators. And we have this great faith, these great faith traditions to teach that can be tremendously life-giving for people, but also have been abused, misused, mistaught, used to put people down, to exclude. It still can do. We can still do it in our churches where we disparage LGBTQ people or women people, Black people, Hispanic people. We can use these traditions. We can teach them to dreadful ill and to tragic outcomes. And we've done it. We've done it for Christians. We've done it over the past 2,000 years. We've legitimated slavery, and all kinds of horrendous things. So what we teach and how we teach it is really what makes or breaks the difference. So I suppose when I thought about this, the passion of my life really has been the question of pedagogy. And if I could make just one more point before I pass the baton, this didn't come under any of the four categories, so I just want to insert it in here. When you, a number of people have come back to the idea that write what you're passionate about, write what you really believe, write what you think matters, write what you consider important, and whether the world will or not, to heck with it. You speak your own word. As Freire would say, name your own realidad, put your own word out there. But when you do write, you want people to read it. And I'm always amazed at how the titles that people can give their essays, instead of being engaging and inviting people in, can be off-putting. So spend time imagining a riveting, engaging title for your essay, and likewise a good opening paragraph that says to the reader, this is terribly important and it'll be helpful to you in your good work. Please don't set this aside. And I just want to give, so you dream, you spend hours dreaming of a good title. Now I'm going to give an example. It was the first edition of Religious Ed Journal that was sitting on my desk, and I just opened it. And the first essay in here, now I have read this essay, and let me say it's an excellent essay. I highly recommend it. It reflects wonderful research, especially cognitive developmental, cultural developmental research. It's insightful, it's wise, it's balanced. It's based on good empirical data. It's based on good theoretical resources. It's an excellent essay. But I may be one of the few people who read it because of the title. And as I said, I don't want to just pick on this, but this happens regularly when I look at the journal. Titles that are poorly crafted, that don't bring people in. The title here is Religious Socialization, Education, and the Perceptions of Heaven among first-grade Muslim children in Kuwait. Now, as I said, it's an excellent essay, but that title gives the impression that it's a very narrow topic. In fact, it definitely is speaking out of a particular context, but I found it having universal wisdom. So how would I rename that title? I don't know, but I would have something like, how do little kids learn about heaven? And then maybe a subtitle, insights from the Muslim children of Kuwait. There could be a subtitle, but a good question that focuses it, rather than this title poorly serves an excellent essay. So when you come to write your essay and you've written it and so on, spend time with that opening, with that title that'll invite people in. So as I said, how do little kids learn about heaven? And then you might have a subtitle, insights from the Muslim children in Kuwait or something like that. But have a title that will draw people in and an opening paragraph that will assure them that they should read on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Groome. Dr. Seymour.
Back in the mid-1990s, I co-wrote an essay with my spouse entitled Wrestling in the Night. And the focus of that essay, published in the journal, was how do the people of God connect everyday life with faith? And friends, that's the question that has motivated me and still does for all of my career. Tom is absolutely right. I think we've done almost more harm in the name of faith and religion to people than we have done hope and good news. Now, as a Christian, and I'm turning to my credo here, I honestly believe that Jesus made a humongous difference in life and in his culture, but he did it because he took life and his culture very seriously. And I think that probably 2/3 of the people that are leading public religious conversation today have never understood critically or in any depth the faith. Do you hear what I'm saying? I'm really struggling. How do we make a difference? That's what religious education is about. And if you look at the news, almost every evening, people are leaving, quote unquote, the church because of the fact of the positions that the church holds, not because of holding positions for justice and hope and new life, but because of holding positions for restrictions, and judgment. And I'm afraid that if some of us don't take seriously and continue to struggle to help the people of God make connections critically and with discernment between their faith and public life, that we may have done much more harm than we've ever done good. I think, honestly, the best book I've ever written is the shortest I've ever written, and it was the last. It's a little tiny book on called Teaching Biblical Faith, and it's on 10 different models of Bible study. And they're written 4 pages each so that somebody in a local congregation could pick it up and read it and use it and teach it. There used to be a network in my denomination of teacher training places, outstanding curriculum, supporting people as they helped others in educational methodologies. That's not there anymore. That is not there anymore. So the question is, how do we help the people of God make sense of their lives? And that's really is a struggle in front of me, and I think it's a task for all of us. We deeply believe in our faith traditions. We deeply believe in the interconnections of our faith traditions. We deeply believe in critical reflection. We need to help the people of God engage in that kind of reflection. I think that's our vocation.
Thank you.
I totally agree with what Jack said, and he said much better than what I was planning to say. I just finished a co-edited volume, which will be available before AAR. The title is Embodying Anti-Racist Christianity, and subtitle is Asian American Theological Resources for Anti-Racism. I intentionally, I worked with a lot early career colleague who needs, she has a lot of articles, but she doesn't have a book. So it was a sort of my part of mentoring her so that she has her name on a book cover. And also intentionally, we invited early career colleagues mostly to participate in this project because they have a really amazing training and perspectives on anti-racism. And only myself and Courtney Goto of Boston University are 2 religious educators in the volume. But the reason why I took on this project was what Jack exactly said. How do we make a difference? Especially someone like me, who personally experienced hate crimes from white men in my own neighborhood, a block from my house during pandemic. And also hate crimes against Asian Americans are still increasing. And yet, when I pay attention to media, who is speaking on behalf of Asian American communities, mostly Asian American men who have not done much of anti-racism work before, but that they happen to be mega church pastors, and they suddenly become the spokesperson, or they are clueless about gender and sexuality issues and LGBTQ issues, only talking about Asian American hate crimes, not in connecting to anti-Black racism or settler white colonialism, all that. So that those things really concerned me and some of my colleagues. And so how do we make some difference? So we realized that there is no both scholarly and accessible book to help people who see all these connections. So for me, as a religious educator, it is very important. How do I make a change, especially at where I am and with my career? I'm not looking for more fame or more name, my name on book, but what difference do I make? And also, I realized that to do that work, especially working on this book, I realized that collaborations with the colleagues in other fields is really important. I learned so much from my early career colleagues in other fields, who's reading even, who's their bibliography, that some of their bibliography I haven't heard of. So I had to keep up with my reading list too. So collaborations and how do I make a difference? So for me, as a religious educator, that's the questions that I wrestle with. So how do we help people in not only in the church but in public sphere understand what's going on, and how do we teach them, and beyond our narrowly trained religious education and context, but how do we bring religious education and theology to the wider context? So that's the question I have, and that led me to do art exhibit curation work as a part of my public education, and also collaborating with colleagues in other fields. So for me, that's important, and the question that I wrestle with all the time: how do we make a difference at a world that is filled with the violence and hates?
Thank you so much. And Professor Hess.
This is a hard question for me to answer. And I think in listening to my colleagues here, my cherished colleagues here, I think I'm often finding myself at the intersection of a number of systemic forces that are pretty destructive. And I got interested in religious education because I was very interested in the way people were making meaning in their lives in the midst of media. And I was involved in a very vibrant Catholic community in Ohio, and they were doing stuff. This was the beginning of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and we were doing all sorts of things with very few funds, but we were being present to people. And meanwhile, my job at that time was running a nonprofit that was converting abandoned railroad corridors to trails. So I was giving all these talks to very wealthy white business owners who felt like they couldn't make a difference in the world. And I was trying to understand why it was that these Catholic folk I was deeply involved with believed we could make a difference, and these business people who had all this power did not think they could. And that drove me quixotically into theological study, right? And ultimately into religious ed, because systematic theology wouldn't let me ask those questions, but religious education did. And those are questions I still have. I mean, I have questions about how is it that we function in a world? How do we support sustaining and faithful discernment in the world of algorithmic enclaves, right? How do we do work in faith when the very organizations we're a part of, the Catholic Church, institutions of higher ed, are so thoroughly suffused with all of these systemically distorting forces, right? And as much as the feminist in me gets frustrated with the way we talk about sinfulness, theologically, I want to say the brokenness of human being that lives in those frameworks helps me say something about what's going on, and the goodness of divinity, of the divine, of the ways in which we are interdependent helps me respond to that. So those are still my questions. Those are still the things I'm trying to think about. And the world that we're in right now is about, like, if you think the printing press was a major transformation in communication, just wait and watch what happens with AI. Alex just noted to me in a direct message, I'm going to quote you, Alex, in response to Tom Groome's concern, If you want a pithy title for your journal article, type your article into ChatGPT and ask it for a pithy title. It will give you one almost instantaneously. So what does that mean about writing? What does that mean about sharing ideas? What does that mean about the world that we're in, right? Those are questions that I haven't found any other field that actually allows me to ask these questions in these interdisciplinary grounded ways and invites the creativity and the passionate activism even to flourish. So that's why I cherish this field. It's why I cherish these questions. It's why I keep writing, although more and more of my writing is out in the world digitally. It's not in publishers because I have the privilege of being tenured at an institution. And I don't know how I feel about that. I actually am not sure that's a great thing. So anyway, that's a lot of ambivalence to end on, but I am mostly ambivalent.
Thank you. What a way, I mean, thank you. Just really want to express my gratitude. I will have something to say toward the end, but at this point, I want to open it up to our audience for Q&A. So given our limited time here, we're gonna have about 8 or 9 minutes or so of question and answer and engagement. I invite comments, questions at this time for our panelists. But yes, in addition to questions, feel free to just give us your thoughts and ideas as well as you've been hearing our esteemed colleagues. So floor is open.
Mary, would you be willing to expand a little bit on your thoughts on AI, in particular, how that's going to impact research and future writing?
Well, I mean, I will tell you what I think, but I don't think I have a clue. I don't think any of us have a clue. The link I put into the chat early on from Hank Green's YouTube video is probably the best thing I've read about it or seen about it. I think personally, my stance on this is we're going to have to figure out how to bring relational context. We're going to have to take seriously Parker Palmer's community of truth epistemology. We're going to have to figure out how to do relational work with each other, because generative AI is incredibly powerful and in some really wonderful ways, right? I was at an ATS webinar a couple weeks ago where they were talking about things like you write a script for a class you're teaching and you put it into ChatGPT so it can make it pithier and it can break it up into a better script in better chunks, right? Okay, that's a really promising, useful thing for it. But what do you do with students? Like, can you invite students, for instance, to ask a question? There's a great YouTube video, I should look for it and put it in the chat, where a guy who comments a lot in YouTube asked ChatGPT what its denomination was. And it was a very interesting, long discussion with ChatGPT that was about ecclesiology, that was about theological anthropology, that it was a very sophisticated conversation. So I don't know, right? I mean, I think we're going to have to figure out how to trust each other's work as being real. And how do we know that? I don't know. I mean, the more we build relationships in this space, so we put context, right? Like, I'm really convinced that context collapse is a huge deal. And how do we recontextualize? How do we teach with that? How do we learn? How do we help each other be critical of the things that get produced by it? You know, and that doesn't even touch on all the scary things. That's just the benefits. I know Eileen Daly, who is in this room, has been thinking about trying to propose a program theme for REA for the 2025 year on AI. So if you all are interested in those, or you think about that, you should talk to Eileen.
Thank you. Another concern is student writing as well, right? So AI is fundamentally changing the way students are approaching assignments. And in a way, I see this as an opportunity for us as educators to take writing more seriously and also to encourage forms of writing that are less formulaic. ChatGPT will offer, formulaic answers to things. And I think this is an opportunity to allure students to the writing process and to have them express kind of their raw thoughts on things. So thank you for that. And it's definitely a timely theme, and looking forward to that 2025 session. Okay, Professor Ospino.
Thank you, Cesar, and thank you everyone for such a wonderful panel, so many ideas. I definitely have my own thoughts on the whole question of tenure, but I'm not going to talk about tenure today. Just wanted to make a quick comment. When I first read the work of the religious educators, some of the members who are here, Jack, your work, Tom, your work in the 1970s and 80s and so on, I noticed that there was a lot of conversation among religious education scholars, in books, in the journal, people responded to one another and so on. I see less and less of that, these days among religious educators. And I think that, this is perhaps something that we need to be rescuing into the future, because the only way for us to advance the field and write with a certain level of motivation is if we are reading each other and responding to one another, engaging with one another, and sometimes disagreeing with one another. I have mentioned this to Joyce, in reading the journal, that sometimes I read the journal, and every time I read the journal, it's like traveling into a whole different planet, every issue, because there are so many new voices, but I don't see these voices talking to one another. So I just wanted to put that forward, because I think that it really connects in terms of the generational changes that motivate or preclude our writing as we move forward.
Very good.
Thank you.
My apologies to my friends, but Riley never acts up, but he did today. But now he's back asleep, so all is well. All 8 pounds of him.
Yes, Aileen.
Mary, I think, has a cat. I think I saw your cat, Mary. Did I?
Oh, yes, my cat floated through a couple times.
Yeah, a thing just to add about the AI question is, I mean, I heard an implication a few minutes ago that we should find ways to not go down that road. And I think that there are places that we shouldn't go down that road. But I think that one of the rich potentials of our future is what good might come from going down that road. What might we be able to bring using a chat GPT and other large language models, and even once we're not just limiting it to language and we're seeing large models in other domains, image models, video models, etc. How might we bring a lens to using that technology that serves the human good? I get the idea of wanting to train students with good writing skills, but I wonder what they might also bring if given the potential of using ChatGPT to expand their creativity and not have to put all of their time, energy, and attention into getting the writing correct. And so I just invite you all to think creatively about what potential for good might be in all that we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
Thank you. Questions?
I raised the hand, and I really agree with what Eileen said. I happen to be at a school that has a AI, Artificial Intelligence Institute, first one in theological school in the world. And this AI institute is generating revenues for the school. Yes. So when I became the dean, I noticed that about four or five of our faculty are meeting on a weekly basis to talk about machine learning, and out of curiosity. And then our IT department colleagues who are engineers, that they both have a PhDs in theology. So, and then when I went to board meeting, I noticed that some people who are doing the work in Denver Tech Center and Silicon Valley. So I brought them together, including some other colleagues, what it means to be a theological educator in the AI era. And that led us to create AI Institute and got almost 750,000 funding from Luce Institute. And we noticed that AI only works because of there is data, but the data is very much biased. The bias especially against the women and people of color, especially facial recognition equipment that has a lot of skin color biases. So we do ethical consulting work for startup companies. And we, in that capacity, I had a chance to talk with Mira Lane, who was the head of ethics area of entire Microsoft. She just moved to Google. That when I spoke with her, her notion of ethics didn't have anything about what it means to be human or spirituality or even theological anthropology. Ethics has very secular, limited understanding they operate with. So we religious educator has a lot to offer in terms of how these tech companies understand the ethics, in expanding their ethics. And we can train our students to be not only ethical users of AI, but ethical shapers of AI world. So I think it's very timely topic that we can work on together.
Thank you. Okay, I did have a question, but we are running out of time, so I will just email some of our participants directly. So it was a true joy facilitating this session. My gratitude to our participants for your attention and engagement. Thanks for making this session eventful. Of course, I want to thank each of our panelists for their graciousness and time today and throughout their careers. So thank you all. Indeed, your wise lives have resulted in a treasure trove of texts and teaching that will certainly endure as coordinates on ever-shifting maps during the uncertain futures ahead. From them, we take heart as we venture down our own paths of remaking the field with imagination and courage to meet the perennial questions and concerns of our times. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here. It was a wonderful session, very rich. My gratitude. Thank you.